It is our duty to still, sorry, it is our duty still to endeavor to avoid war. But if it shall actually take place, no matter by whom brought on, we must defend ourselves. If our house be on fire, without inquiring whether it was fired from within or without, we must try to extinguish it. Thomas Jefferson. Bingo.
From high atop the battlements of CaptainCurmudgeon, where we continue to persist in our stubborn belief that history did not begin last Tuesday and words still mean things. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius, and thanks ever so much for joining us tonight. Much like the topic of Greenland last week, tonight's subject is something suddenly spoken about with great urgency and great presumed authority by people who learned of its existence approximately 15 minutes ago, and in terms of historical circumspection, would be lucky to identify the difference between their ass and a hole in the ground. And so, tonight we present for your kind consideration Curmudgeon's Field Guide to the Insurrection Act. This is one of those pieces of legislation that lives most of its life in quiet, blissful obscurity, much like a fire extinguisher behind some glass, rarely used, poorly understood, and suddenly the focus of intense attention when smoke appears somewhere in the building. And as is so often the case, the louder the panic, the thinner the understanding. The Insurrection Act is not new, it is not secret, and it is not a recent invention of whichever political faction currently alarms you the most. It is instead a blunt, awkward, historically contingent tool written by a young republic that deeply mistrusted centralized power, but mistrusted chaos even more. So tonight, in the continued interest of public mental hygiene, we will do what we always endeavor to do on this program: slow the tape down, widen the aperture, and look at what the Insurrection Act is, what it is not, how it has actually been used down through the centuries, and why the current conversation about it is generating far more heat than light. So please securely fasten your safety harness and keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times. There will be no polar bears this week, but there will be malicious federal troops, constitutional anxiety, and at least one moment where history once again fails to cooperate with our modern hysteria. Episode 1, 1807. What problem the Insurrection Act was actually written to solve. The Insurrection Act of 1807 was not written in a moment of calm. Rather, it was written in a moment of something one might call nervous clarity. The United States was very young, very lightly populated, very poorly connected, and very deeply unsure whether it would long survive its own initial success. There was nothing resembling a federal police force or a standing internal security apparatus, and the nascent republic exercised only the loosest control over vast, newly acquired territories that existed more on maps than in reality. The Louisiana Purchase had doubled the size of the country almost overnight, and with it doubled the number of ways in which the whole experiment might well unravel. Enter our old friend Aaron Burr. That dude again? Yes, that dude again. Former vice president, professional scoundrel, and walking argument against strong assumptions about elite virtue. Mr. Burr spent the mid-1800s plotting to carve out his own personal empire somewhere in the Western Territories, possibly by detaching land from the United States, possibly by conquering parts of Spanish North America, possibly by egomania alone. And to be sure, he had no shortage of that. The details remain somewhat murky. The alarm, however, was not. What Burr represented was not merely treason, but plausible treason, a reminder that ambitious men with money and followers and guns could potentially exploit distance, weak institutions, and state-level hesitation to challenge federal authority outright, and to possibly succeed in doing so. The Insurrection Act was Congress's answer to that reality. It authorized the president, under specific conditions, to deploy federal military force when state authorities were unable or unwilling to enforce federal law, not to rule the country, but to keep it from flying apart. This was not a power grab, it was an admission. The founders did not trust standing armies. They trusted unchecked fragmentation even less. The act exists because the Republic understood early on that laws without enforcement are merely polite suggestions, and that sovereignty, once challenged by force, must be answered in kind or not at all. Episode 2, 1807 to 1830, Federalism, Fear, and the Question of Who's Actually in Charge. To understand why the Insurrection Act exists at all, one has to bear in mind that early America was not especially confident about the answer to a very basic question. Who exactly is in charge here? The Constitution created a federal government, but it did so delicately, nervously even, like a man juggling nitroglycerin next to a blast furnace while insisting that he's got everything perfectly under control. The states retained enormous power. Local militias were assumed to be the first line of defense against disorder. The federal government was meant to be strong enough to survive, but weak enough not to frighten anyone. And this worked, right up until it didn't. The problem was not tyranny from above. The problem was paralysis from below. What happens when a state cannot enforce the law? Just as importantly, what happens when it will not? The founders had seen this movie already under the Articles of Confederation, where the national government could issue polite requests and then watch helplessly as states simply ignored them. The Insurrection Act was designed to prevent a return to that same sort of impotence. It does not erase federalism, it merely acknowledges its limitations. The act assumes correctly that emergencies do not wait for jurisdictional debates to resolve themselves, that mobs do not consult constitutional theory before lighting their torches and burning their effigies, and that a republic which cannot compel obedience to its own laws will not remain a republic for very long. This is why the act is structured as a last resort. The president may intervene only after state authorities are overwhelmed, obstructed, or are actively complicit in the breakdown of civic order. In other words, federal force is not the first move. It is the fine, we are out of options move. From the beginning, the Insurrection Act embodied a hard truth about self-government. Liberty requires order, and order occasionally requires someone to be willing to say, that's enough. Episode 3, 1831 to 1860, Nullification, Abolition, and the Slow Boil Toward Crisis. If the early republic worried that the federal government might be too weak, the decades before the Civil War answered that concern with a very long, very grinding, very arduous stress test. The Insurrection Act did not gather dust. It was invoked, carefully, selectively, as the nation discovered that disorder did not always come in the form of mobs. Sometimes it arrived wearing the cloak of state authority. In 1832, South Carolina attempted to nullify federal law outright, declaring that tariffs passed by Congress were unenforceable within its borders. This was not protest, it was defiance. President Andrew Jackson responded by making something very clear. The Union was not a suggestion. He prepared to use federal force to ensure the law was executed, invoking the same authority embedded in the framework of the Insurrection Act. The crisis diffused before shots were fired, but the precedent was set nonetheless. Federal law was not optional. Elsewhere, disorder took different forms. Abolitionist movements clashed violently with pro-slavery factions. Mobs broke into jails. Courts were obstructed. Federal marshals were attacked while attempting to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. A morally repugnant law, to be sure, but a law nonetheless. Here, the Insurrection Act reveals an uncomfortable reality. It is morally neutral. It does not care whether a law is just. It cares whether a law exists and whether the federal government can enforce it. That neutrality is precisely why the act is dangerous and why it is necessary. By the 1850s, the country was coming apart not in one clean rupture, but in 1,000 local refusals to accept shared authority. Kansas bled, Congress brawled, states armed themselves. The Insurrection Act was invoked to suppress violence, to protect federal officers, and to preserve the idea that there was still a United States, even as the substance of that unity eroded bit by bit. By the time the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, the act had already done its job about as long as it could. It cannot prevent civil war. It can only delay the moment when the question of sovereignty is answered by gunfire instead of by law. Episode 4, 1861 to 1865, Lincoln, Rebellion, and the Insurrection Act at full throttle. Everything that came before was prologue. If the Insurrection Act was designed for emergency, the Civil War was the nightmare scenario that its authors barely dared to imagine, but quietly prepared for anyway. When Southern states seceded in 1860 and 61, they did not merely protest federal authority, they repudiated it. Courts closed, federal officers were expelled, forts were seized, militias became armies. This was not civil unrest, this was organized rebellion. Abraham Lincoln wasted no time pretending otherwise. Within weeks of taking office, he invoked the Insurrection Act to call up state militias, deploy federal troops, and suppress what the law still insisted on calling insurrection, even as it metastasized into full-scale war. Why the legal fiction? Because admitting that the Confederate States were a separate sovereign nation would have conceded the very point the war was being fought to deny. The Insurrection Act allowed Lincoln to do something crucial, to treat the rebellion as illegal without legitimizing it. It gave him the authority to suspend habeas corpus, to occupy territory, to arrest conspirators, and to enforce federal law where state governments had collapsed or defected. None of this was neat. All of it was controversial. Much of it would be challenged in court for decades afterward. But the alternative was far worse. Without the act, the federal government would have been paralyzed by its own constitutional scruples while armed rebellion dismantled the Union in real time. This is where romantic versions of American liberty tend to start getting squeamish. The truth is less comfortable. Lincoln preserved the Constitution by stretching it nearly to the breaking point. He governed in a space where legality lagged behind necessity and where every decision carried the risk of becoming precedent for abuse. And yet, the Union survived. The Insurrection Act did not win the war. Armies did that. But it made the war legally possible. It supplied the scaffolding that allowed a constitutional government to wage existential conflict without admitting it had ceased to be constitutional at all. When Appomattox arrived, the rebellion was defeated. The insurrection, however, was not. It had merely transmogrified into a different form. And that meant the act was not about to retire. Episode 5, 1870 to 1875, Grant, Reconstruction, and the federal boot on the Klan's neck. If Lincoln stretched the Constitution to save the Union, Ulysses S. Grant used the Insurrection Act to force the Union to still mean something afterward. And this is the part of the story that almost never gets told straight. After the Civil War, the shooting stopped, but the rebellion did not. It simply shed its uniforms and went underground. What emerged in the defeated South was a campaign of organized terror aimed at undoing Reconstruction by any means necessary. Enter the Ku Klux Klan. This was not a loose collection of hayseeds in pillowcases. It was a paramilitary insurgency, coordinated, violent, and explicitly political. Its goal was to overthrow Republican state governments, suppress black voting, and nullify federal authority through intimidation and murder. State governments either could not stop it or they would not. Grant understood something that many later presidents would prefer to forget. When states abdicate their responsibilities, sovereignty does not vanish, it merely defaults upward. Between 1870 and 71, Congress passed the Enforcement Acts, including the Ku Klux Klan Act, explicitly grounding their power within the Insurrection Act. Grant used that authority frequently and aggressively. Federal troops were deployed. Habeas corpus was suspended in parts of South Carolina. Thousands of Klansmen were arrested. The organization was effectively shattered within less than a year. This is the point where modern sensibilities often grow uncomfortable. Federal troops occupying American states, mass arrests, suspended civil liberties. And yet, elections were held, black citizens voted, Republican governments functioned. The rule of law, though imperfect and fragile, reasserted itself. Grant invoked the Insurrection Act more than any other president, and by a very wide margin, not because he was power hungry, but because Reconstruction was a counterinsurgency campaign masquerading as peacetime governance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The federal government only succeeded in protecting civil rights when it was willing to enforce them at the point of a bayonet. And when that willingness faded in the mid-1870s, so then did Reconstruction. The lesson is a stark and deeply unfashionable one. Rights unenforced are rights revoked. The Insurrection Act did not betray American liberty in this era. It defended it briefly, incompletely, and at enormous political cost. When federal enforcement ended, local despotisms swiftly rushed back in, which brings us neatly along to the next phase when the act is no longer used to suppress rebellion, but to break strikes, disperse mobs, and manage the growing pains of an industrial empire. Episode 6, 1877 to 1921, Labor Wars, Railroads, and the Price of Order. If Reconstruction was the Insurrection Act used to defend constitutional government, the late 19th and early 20th centuries were the act used to defend infrastructure. And that distinction is one that matters. America after the Civil War did not merely rebuild, it industrialized at a speed that bordered on psychosis. Railroads stitched the continent together, steel and coal fueled explosive growth, and cities filled with newly arrived workers who discovered, to their surprise, that industrial capitalism was not an especially sentimental thing. When things broke down, they broke down swiftly and rather violently. The opening act was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, triggered by wage cuts during a depression. What began as a labor protest metastasized into mass unrest across multiple states. Rail yards burned, militias collapsed, state governments panicked. President Rutherford B. Hayes invoked the Insurrection Act and sent federal troops into several cities, not to mediate, not to negotiate, but to keep the trains moving. And this sets a durable precedent. The federal government would intervene when disorder threatened national commerce, regardless of whose fault that disorder was. Order first, justice later, possibly never. The pattern repeats itself with the Pullman strike of 1894. Railroad workers walked out, rail traffic stopped, and the mail stopped too. President Grover Cleveland invoked the Insurrection Act over the objections of Illinois' governor and deployed federal troops. Violence followed, strikers were killed, the strike collapsed. The Supreme Court later upheld Cleveland's actions, affirming a principle that still echoes today. The federal government may use force to ensure the functioning of national systems, even against state resistance. The act had quietly evolved from an emergency tool into a standing guarantee that the machine would keep running. Through the early 20th century, the Insurrection Act hovered in the background of labor conflict like a loaded revolver on the mantelpiece. It wasn't always invoked. Sometimes the mere threat of it was enough. Federal troops were used to suppress riots, guard facilities, and restore order during strikes that overwhelmed local authorities. This was not subtle, nor was it ideologically coherent. The same act that had been used to crush white supremacist terrorism was now being used to break strikes being led by desperate workers. The Constitution did not care why order collapsed, only that it had. The federal government had become the armed middleman between capital and chaos. And here is the key transition. Rebellion was no longer necessary. Disorder alone was sufficient. Which brings us to the next act. When the Insurrection Act is applied not to organized labor or to insurgents, but to cities themselves. Episode 7, 1957 to 1963, Desegregation and the Return of Federal Force. If the Insurrection Act had spent decades as a blunt instrument of industrial order, the mid-20th century marked its moral transition and its public rehabilitation. In 1957, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus used the National Guard to block black students from entering Little Rock Central High School, openly defying federal court orders. President Dwight Eisenhower responded by invoking the Insurrection Act, federalizing the Arkansas National Guard, and sending in the 101st Airborne Division. This was not in any way subtle. This was the United States Army escorting teenagers to class. And the signal was unmistakable. State resistance to constitutional rights would be treated as insurrectionist disorder. For the first time since Reconstruction, the act was used not to suppress reform, but to enforce it. The pattern repeated in 1962 at the University of Mississippi, where riots broke out over James Meredith's enrollment. President Kennedy invoked the act, federal marshals and troops restored order. In 1963, Governor George Wallace staged his infamous stand in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. Kennedy again invoked the act, although Wallace folded before troops were required. The lesson was now institutionalized. The states could posture all they wanted, but Washington would ultimately prevail. Episode 8, 1964 to 68, Civil Rights, Riots, and the Federal Referee. And then came the riots. From 1964 through 68, American cities erupted following civil rights flashpoints and later the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Entire neighborhoods burned, local police forces collapsed or withdrew. Presidents Johnson and later Nixon invoked the Insurrection Act repeatedly to deploy federal troops and National Guard units into major cities. This was no longer about segregation alone. It was about the federal government acting as a national fire brigade. The act had completed a full ideological circuit at this point. Reconstruction, enforcing civil order, labor era, enforcing economic order, civil rights era, enforcing constitutional order, and finally riot control, enforcing public order. Same statute, different moral valence, identical legal authority. And once again, precedent hardened. Episode 9, 1989 to 1992, From Panama to Los Angeles. By the late 20th century, the Insurrection Act had become less controversial and perhaps more ominous. Los Angeles, 1992. After the Rodney King verdict, Los Angeles descended into mass unrest. Local law enforcement was overwhelmed. The California National Guard proved insufficient. President George H.W. Bush invoked the Insurrection Act and deployed federal troops. The intervention worked. Order was restored. But the optics were different now. Televised urban warfare made Americans newly aware of what federal force inside the country actually looked like. The act was no longer abstract history. It was helicopters, Humvees, and soldiers on city streets. Episode 10, 2005 to the present, Katrina, Chaos, and the Modern Anxiety. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina introduced a new anxiety. What if disorder wasn't political at all? In New Orleans, law enforcement collapsed entirely. Looting, violence, and abandonment followed. President George W. Bush considered invoking the Insurrection Act to federalize response efforts. He ultimately did not, but Congress amended the act shortly thereafter to broaden presidential authority during natural disasters. That expansion was so sweeping, it frightened governors across the political spectrum, and it was partially rolled back in 2008. Still, the Rubicon had been approached. The act was no longer just about rebellion. It was about failure. In the 21st century, the Insurrection Act exists as a constitutional emergency lever no one wants pulled, but which no one is willing to remove. It has been discussed during protests, riots, pandemics, and political unrest. It remains invoked sparingly, but referenced constantly. Its power lies less in its use than in its availability. The act endures because it answers a question no society can avoid forever. What happens when order collapses and no one else can restore it? The answer for over 2 centuries has been the same. The federal government steps in. Not because it wants to, but because eventually someone must. Epilogue: the Insurrection Act and the problem no republic escapes. The Insurrection Act endures for a simple reason. No republic can survive on consent alone. Consent works until it doesn't. Laws function until they aren't obeyed. Institutions command respect until they don't. At that point, every system confronts the same ancient question: who enforces the rules when the rules stop enforcing themselves? The Insurrection Act is America's answer to that question. Not a comfortable answer, not a pretty one, but a necessary one. It exists because the founders were not romantics. They had lived through rebellion. They understood that liberty without order collapses into faction, and order without authority collapses into chaos. So they built a constitutional emergency brake, one deliberately ugly, deliberately frightening, and deliberately hard to pull. The act does not create tyranny, it presumes it. It assumes that someday, somewhere, civil society will fracture badly enough that force will be required to restore it, and that pretending otherwise is childish. Every invocation of the act has followed the same pattern. Local authority fails. State authority falters or resists. Federal authority intervenes, order is restored, and then everyone argues about it afterward. That argument is not a flaw. It is the system working. The danger is not that the act exists. The danger is forgetting why it exists, or worse, assuming it will never be needed again. History teaches the opposite lesson. The Insurrection Act is not a weapon looking for a target. It is a fire extinguisher sitting behind glass. You don't admire it. You don't celebrate it. You don't pull it out to make a point. But when the building is on fire and no one else can put it out, you'll be very glad it's there. And if that idea makes you uncomfortable, good. A republic that feels entirely safe has already stopped paying attention. And with that, we return the act to its case. We hope that it gathers dust for another generation, and we remind ourselves quietly that order is not automatic, it is enforced. In the present day, without naming names or parties, there are numerous elected officials at the state and local level who would do well to remind themselves that they, and all persons who enter into public office in the United States, voluntarily swore a solemn oath to preserve and defend the Constitution. That means the whole Constitution, even the parts that you don't care for at the moment. The Supremacy Clause contained in Article 6 is not a polite suggestion. It's not a bug in the system. It is the system. It means when you raise your hand and swear that solemn oath, you acknowledge that you are powerless to pick and choose which federal statutes suit your fancy and which ones don't. In other words, this is not a smorgasbord. You don't get to pick what's on the menu. Elsewhere in that solemn oath, you swear to see that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed, and there is no parenthetical clause that says, unless my state passes a law to the contrary. That is not how any of this works. You additionally swear that you are undertaking said oath without mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Why do the Supremacy Clause and the Insurrection Act exist? They exist because, regrettably, they have to. They exist because a hammer has no utility without an arm to swing it. They exist because sometimes men swear solemn oaths whose conditions they have no real intention of living up to. They exist because the alternative to their existence is balkanization, chaos, and anarchy. And here, ladies and gentlemen, ends the field guide. I now transmit you into the frostbitten arms of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
You're muted. You're muted, dude.
You ever hate yourself all the way to the
Here it
is. Fucking amateurs in this place. What are we doing? I mean, Jesus. All right. We're gonna do this instead.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
You might as well appeal against the thunderstorm as against these terrible hardships of war. War is cruelty. There is no use trying to reform it. The crueler it is, the sooner it will be over. William Tecumseh Sherman.
Boom.
Y'all need to really read up on this man. He had an interesting doctrine of war, and he did reduce the length of the war almost exactly as much as he said he would, with exactly the troops he took with him. And there's not a lot of examples of that happening in any form of government.
He had a job that he really hated, but he still wanted to be outstanding at it. And that's, probably a conundrum that a lot of people have. Maybe not writ so large sometimes, but, still the same sort of conundrum.
Well, I would make the argument, and this is coming from the perspective of a victim, that while he was not necessarily a good man, he seems to have been an honorable one.
Yeah.
There is a distinction there.
And history does the funniest things to the randomest people, because when the war begins in 1861, Grant is a drunk working at a tanner's shop, and Sherman is a mental patient who everyone thinks is permanently out of his mind. And look where they both wind up by 1865.
Yeah, and when it comes to Grant, there's another excellent quote that I stumbled across again. And this is yet again Sherman. Grant stood by me when I was crazy, and I stood by him when he was drunk, and now we stand by each other.
Yep. That's my favorite Sherman quote of all.
It's a good one. It's because
it's a good one.
You gotta admit, listen, let me pitch his idea to you, and you tell me what you think about it as some upper echelon officer of the Union. Sir, I would like to take 74,000 troops on 3 columns straight through the heart of the South, burning Atlanta and Savannah on my way to the ocean, where you will send the Navy to come pick up my troops. We will live off. We will, dude. Nobody fucking bought it at all. There wasn't a single person in the cabinet that was like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." For the most part, they were like, "Lee will dislodge from fucking Charleston. No,
yeah,
it was Charleston. Lee will dislodge from Charleston and just take Savannah, and you'll never have a hope." Right?
Yeah,
but for some reason, Grant looked at him and was like, "That's the craziest shit I've ever heard. Just so crazy, it just might work." And also, he knew Sherman, right?
Yes,
he knew him in a way, like personally, like they
were friends from the days of the Mexican War.
Right. So he knew just how nutty this guy was, and the type of shit he could pull off. His boys, what are referred to as Uncle Billy's boys, ran roughshod across the South like every Western ever. You can't even make a freaking movie about it, the things they freaking pulled off. I mean, they decimated farms and livestock and every edible source of anything, from literally North Georgia straight through Atlanta, all the way through my hometown and right to Savannah. And he did it on a shoestring, a budget, and a simple wild hair wheel to do it.
And consider the massive amounts of time and blood and treasure that were wasted in the first few years of the war by Lincoln, simply following the personnel hiring recommendations of the military experts and hiring a series of totally useless commanders in chief, McClellan, Meade, and so on, until he finally he starts ignoring all those guys, and he says, "You know what? This Grant guy, he really did a good job at Shiloh. I think I want to give him a shot." And he winds up being the guy who won the war. Lincoln didn't have any military qualifications to speak of. He just said, I keep taking the recommendations you guys give me, I wind up pissing down my leg every time. So you know what? I'm just going to ignore you and go with my gut now. And thank God he went with his gut. And then Grant, when he gains his lofty position, he also goes with his gut and hires his friend Sherman, even though everybody thinks he is just as crazy for doing that, because that fucking psycho mental patient, you're going to put that guy at the head of an army, and he says, "You're goddamn right I am, because I know he can get the job done."
And it's not just first of all, Sherman was at the head of an army. He was not exactly the happiest soldier in the Union. He was not enjoying his job. It wasn't going well. He spent half of his time out on freaking maneuvers doing just the wackiest shit you could imagine. Like, he charged everywhere he freaking went. If there was something to charge at, he charged at it. Right? So
yeah, he was Patton before Patton was cool.
Well, there's a reason we named the tank after him.
Oh, yes. Damn right.
The tank it did exactly what it was designed to do, and it was designed to do exactly what Sherman did. And that's exactly what it did. But the idea of putting Sherman...
What does that question even mean? Is this MAGA? Tell me what that question means. Whoever wrote that question, tell me what it means. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You're good. I'd like to talk about Scott Zuko for a minute.
Okay.
What do you reckon? Are we talking like an internet troll Reddit mod sitting in a basement, his grandmother's basement, yelling for chicken tendies up the stairs? Or is this a debonair, elegant individual with a loquacious vocabulary and a engaging personality? What do you think?
I'm going to lean more toward the former than the latter, but that's just a hunch.
I think he might look a little bit like Napoleon Dynamite when he's gone a little south at 30, but I'm just guessing. I don't know. We call this engagement. Okay, I got a question. You brought up the Pullman incident.
Is this MAGA?
That whole sequence was largely executed on the back of the interruption to the mail. And that was the linchpin that allowed the federal government to step in and strong arm and everything else they did. And like you said, it was not subtle. They didn't show up and be like, guys, it'd be real nice if you just went back to work and doing things. We'd like to get our mail by Christmas. No, they showed up and started fucking busting heads, breaking up protests, just basically laying down the fact that full-on martial law, if I remember right. They closed curfews and shit.
Like, oh yeah,
it was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was as martial as law gets.
Yeah. Once habeas corpus is gone, you got issues, bro.
Yeah, and then and I know, as we know, that's a question that Lincoln really grappled with, and which I touched on during the monologue. That I mean, how far do I have to bastardize the Constitution in order to preserve the Constitution, and along with it, the Union? And I don't think there's ever going to be a correct answer to that question. It obviously worked out well in the event. There is a reason why we are still debating all of those questions.
I think we lost you. We are here.
Am I back?
Oh, yeah. Suddenly you're back. I was fixing to deliver your eulogy. Nearly blood. We are gathered here today to lay to rest our homie.
That's fine. I want to know how you're going to talk about me when I'm gone.
Right. Excellent. Yeah.
Was he MAGA?
Was he MAGA? That's going to be on the tombstone. Was he MAGA? No one knows. Look, I look at it this way. It's sort of a my asshole or their asshole, and I don't really get to choose who the asshole's actually going to be. So when they choose their asshole, and I've got to make a distinction between two assholes, I can pick the loser asshole who can't do anything but fell forward, or the winner asshole who's still an asshole, but he seems to do shit and everybody hates him. Now,
it's a choose your own asshole adventure, just like those books we used to read when we were kids.
It absolutely is, and I am utterly flummoxed by it. But I must apologize to the chat. My bad. I promised that we would do super chats after the monologue, and I accidentally said we were doing super chats, and so
did we get super chats?
We got a super chat, and I'm going to show you some super chats while you read it out. I got to go do the thing and the other thing with the button, right? So
got it.
There's your super chats. Here's your super chat.
Thanks ever so much for the super chat, Kissy May. I sure do appreciate your support. Very nice of you. And now Squatch is going to do the thing where you're going to do that thing with the guy that does the thing.
I will do the thing, but I promise super cats, and I think they like the idea. So we're going to make
super cats are a lot of you, buddy. Nice.
I like that guy.
I love that dude. He seems to be one of the more rational individuals online.
I don't even know who he is. Who is he?
That is Moist Critical Penguin Zero. He's had a bunch of channels because he sometimes has not so popular opinions about things. And so they'll just nuke him, but he doesn't care. He just starts a new channel and renegotiates his contract because he's got millions of subscribers because he's not a fruitcake. Like, what do you know about that Asmongold?
I've seen some of his stuff, but I wouldn't say I'm familiar with him.
Allow me to explain very briefly. Back when the internet first attached to cameras, Asmongold was fiddling with cameras and the internet. When YouTube, and there was a couple other like really exclusive game streaming stuff that was happening around the time YouTube started really picking up steam. Asmongold was doing World of Warcraft game streaming before game streaming was a thing. So when game streaming become a thing, all the platforms that were operating had basically legacied in Asmongold accounts, and he just, anytime there was a new streaming thing, he'd stream to that too. And as such, he ended up being an establishing character in almost every streaming platform on Earth. Moist Critical, on the other hand, picked up a camera one day, filmed himself taking a hot take on something, and landed 1 million subs, and has been repeating that trick ever since, right? Now, they've both been around for freaking ever at this point. They are the root of 10,000 memes. We could do an entire channel based off of nothing but Asmongold reactions.
I'm sure somebody has.
They have. There are hate channels. There are love channels. There are lust channels. There are literal Asmongold hentai fan fictions out there. So I promise you, boys, there's one out there for you. There's a chick out there for you who pictures you in her head as that beautiful little kitty boy that she always wanted.
Yeah.
Just get out there and
you're the bad boy she knows she can fix.
Well, no, see, the thing is in my experience, those guys don't have any problem finding some chick to completely ruin, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm probably not. I mean, if you've got any kind of social currency, women become very quickly not any sort of problem, no matter how repulsive you look.
I've also noticed that being married is something of a aphrodisiac to certain unsavory types of women. Like, they don't fuck with guys unless they're married, because married,
you're not wrong,
taken care of, and you don't have to worry about them chasing after you and lusting after you and stalking your ass and shit, which is total bullshit because all guys are nuts.
Yeah, but I know what you mean, because there is a certain brand of woman who gains extra satisfaction in thinking that this guy prefers me over the woman he's married to. And, history is full of women like that. They're never going to go away. They will always exist in every society and culture and time period. There are certain brands of women, and that's one of them.
Next to water, pussy is the oldest renewable resource.
There's a reason they call it the world's oldest profession, because it is.
Yes, I mean that one was well established long before we conquered fire, bro. Like Prometheus was utterly stunned as soon as the lights came on. What was going on?
Seriously. Yeah, you're not wrong.
Oh, I need to do a deep dive into Sulawesi and the little people on the islands around Sulawesi. I was looking at some stuff the other day. I'm not going to get into it right now, but briefly, there's a tiny hominid that's been discovered on an island off Sulawesi that has identical dentistry to us. Right? Supposedly, this thing's like 500,000 years older than the earliest human. Right? And if it's got teeth like us, teeth are something that don't change real quick, and there's not often cases of convergent evolution. Every animal
Here I
much
thought you were the world's most exotic hominid. What a disappointment.
Well, I mean, I think we've been on boats since we found out stick could float.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. Speaking of ancient mysteries, we still haven't, and I know we've talked about this before once or twice, we still have no idea how the ancient Polynesians navigated the Pacific Ocean to populate all of those islands. We don't have the faintest idea how they did that shit. Thousands and thousands and thousands of miles in the most ridiculously, frail looking little watercraft but they managed to pull it off somehow, and we're still trying to figure out how they did, and I think that's awesome.
That comes down to a couple of different details. The Polynesians are renowned for being island hopping and also oddly up to date on culture across the islands. It wasn't an empire in the sense of a king ruled it. It was an empire in the sense that some sort of mathematical system that allowed them to navigate was in use and was such common knowledge that nothing was ever written down about it. And we don't have that.
And because we haven't discovered it yet, there sits the gigantic hole in our knowledge. And I'm reminded, as you said that, of the Antikythera mechanism, which we know was some kind of nautical navigation tool, but we have no idea how it worked or what it was for. We just know it's about 1,500 years ahead of when it should have been able to exist, which just leads us back to the conclusion that maybe the ancients weren't as primitive as we thought they were.
So that doohickey could be any number of things because of the number of things it actually does. It can't be a clock per se, but it could be an active calendar. You just every day you turn the wheel and you know exactly when everything's going to take place. That's useful for lots of different things. Navigation's just one of them.
There's a possibility that it could be a working marine chronometer over 1,000 years before John Harrison. And how awesome would that be?
The question would come down to how are you marking the time on the day? Like,
exactly.
Got to break it into something like an hour, and how do you rectify this mechanism to the hour of the day? And it might not be an hour; it's just a measurement. We don't know that measurement.
And therein lies much of the difficulty in paleontology, and then the work that paleontologists do, because there's so little commonality in the way that different societies and cultures perceive time and process time and mark time. And I'm reminded, as I'm saying that, of when the historians interviewed the survivors, the Indian survivors, veterans of the Battle of Little Bighorn. We didn't have any American survivors. They all got massacred and wiped out, and we had no other way of determining the actual events and the chronology of the engagement except for talking to the veterans from the Indians, the winning side, obviously. And I recall that they asked one of the Indians, exactly how long the hostilities lasted from start to finish. And because he is from a society and a culture that marks time and processes time purely metaphorically, he said it took about as long as it takes a hungry man to eat a big meal. And so we had to take that and try to discern and ascertain what in minutes or fractions of hours exactly what period of time he was actually talking about. I think they settled on about 15-20 minutes, which seems about right. It's about how long it takes me to eat a big meal when I'm hungry. But it's fascinating that certain societies and cultures simply have no need for things like hours and seconds and minutes and the things that we use to minutely calculate the passage of time in our own lives. And real world metaphors are all they ever need for things like that. It took as long as it takes to eat a meal when you're hungry. And what's wrong with that answer?
I mean, that's somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours. Depends on how
It could be any number of things, really.
Sure.
But yeah, and
I mean, given that it was a well-executed ambush that nobody knew nothing about, it probably didn't take long at all. That's like asking how long it took the English to wipe out the French on that beach. As long as it took for the king to show up to the coast, by the time he got there, he saw nothing but bodies. Right? So
yeah,
that was like 2.5 hour walk or some shit.
Yeah, well, and even you can go all the way up until really only a few hundred years ago, where the only reliable clocks were gigantic contraptions that sat in the rooms of buildings. There was no such thing as a pocket watch or a wristwatch. So if you were, say, out on a military campaign or obviously out on a boat, then you obviously had hourglasses, which were very useful for many, 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 many centuries. But that was even up until, I would say, almost the dawn of the 19th century. The hourglass was the best thing that you had, setting aside the motion of the sun and the stars and the moon and what have you. And but it's a great illustration of just how narrowly removed we still are from being able to accurately mark time when you're not in a location where a big fancy clock exists.
So clocks on ships have been an issue since the very beginning. Marking time is, and we were speaking about the Antikythera mechanism, denizen, because I don't want to try to type that out and look like an idiot because I don't speak Greek. But anyway, this is the kind of thing that makes or breaks empires. Your ability to tell time accurately while traveling anywhere, honestly, is integral to everything from commerce to military application to freaking missiles traveling over the Arctic. It's a huge deal.
Up until the middle of the 19th century and the first reliable marine chronometer, there was very little separating any ship on the open ocean from just running aground in the middle of the night and everybody died and nobody's got any idea what happened. That's how much of a gamble taking an ocean voyage was, and that's how important that's why the British Royal Society offered such a gigantic prize to the first guy who could invent a reliable marine chronometer, because it would be of such great use to the Royal Navy and save them so many ships getting destroyed and men being lost. And an uneducated Scotsman winds up winning it, and God bless him. Well done, John Harrison.
Spring steel, baby. It wasn't a coincidence that it happened there. That was the place where that stuff was. The only other place that you had high enough quality steel to do that kind of type of stuff at that time was Germany. And they weren't really doing the springs thing. They were doing lenses and shit at the time, I think. I mean, they had good steel. They just weren't making springs with it. So Anyway, what do we do when threatened with the Insurrection Act in a situation like Minneapolis? Is it imported onto the city? Is it just the protesters? What if we find out these aren't legitimate protesters? What if these are all paid actors?
Which many of them almost certainly are, and that's not a new phenomenon. That's a phenomenon that's been going on for some years now, and I think the Insurrection Act should have been invoked weeks or months ago. I think federal agents need to be, well, how about let's backtrack a little bit and ask the central animating question of the situation by asking, why is Minneapolis crawling with illegal aliens in the first place?
It is a sanctuary city.
And the last administration threw open the border and allowed millions of illegals into the country because they think that's politically advantageous for their electoral prospects.
Okay, speaking of electoral process, what do you think about the FBI raid in Georgia?
I was going to ask you about that. I think it's weird. I think it's weird that Tulsi Gabbard was there.
Right?
I'm not saying necessarily that there's anything nefarious going on. It just seems outside of her professional bailiwick to unless there is a credible intelligence to indicate that shenanigans related to the 2020 election were originating from a foreign source. That's the only thing I can think of. But otherwise, it's really quite weird. What do you think about it?
Okay, if you want, and I'm looking at this from the perspective of political theater, right? And you want it to appear that you're doing something behind the scenes that no one knows about, but you also want people to know that it's happening. You take someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who has the charisma to pull off secret shit and not look like a bitch doing it, right? And doesn't give a shit if she does look like a bitch doing it. She'll look good while doing it either way. And you put her in charge of some shady, possibly clandestine type stuff, because personally I think she'll keep the secret, and I think she'll execute with extreme prejudice when she finds out what's going on. Remember, she was a Democrat.
Oh yes, very much a Democrat.
She took some sort of great offense to something she witnessed in that party and is now one of the better MAGA dinos or rhinos. Because not all of MAGA, first of all, MAGA is not Republican, and Republicans aren't typically, to speak.
That is absolutely correct, and that distinction cannot be made often enough.
No one recognizes that distinction, and it's because President Trump ran on a mid-90s fiscal platform and won as a Republican candidate. And that is not conservative and doesn't represent conservatives hardly at all. However, 20 years, 30 years is a long time. And so now maybe it is somewhat conservative from that perspective.
Yeah, and the fact that Trump has 3 ex-Democrats in his cabinet would seem to suggest that he's no sort of cheerleader for the GOP. Or as we know, he's not. He was a registered Democrat until 2011, I believe.
He saw something in the Democrat Party that disturbed him enough. And I think largely it was the fact that they shunned him. I think he floated his name for a Democrat president years ago, back when he had the clout that he thought he could pull it off. And they blackballed him for whatever reason it was. They blackballed him. And hypothetically, just shooting the moon over here, he badmouthed Epstein early on. And I wonder if that might not be what got him blackballed from the DNC.
It could be. And he was also very open for a long time. I mean, if you know the history and have been paying attention longer than 5 minutes. He said for a long time that I know I want to run for president at some point, and in the year I decide to run, whether I think the Democrat Party or the Republican Party offers me an easy path, because I know I will need to stage a hostile takeover of one or the other of them, because you simply can't get to the presidency except through one of those two avenues. Then I will choose one or the other when the time comes. It's not because he had any particular ideological predilection toward the one or the other. He just saw, because these parties change their views like people change underwear. We know that parties are not vessels of ideology. They are repositories of power. And he simply said that the year I want to run, whichever one of the parties is more aligned with the ideas that I think I can use to win, then I will pick that party and I will try and take it over and I will try and get their nomination. And it just happened to be the Republicans in 2016. It's not because he's any sort of ideological conservative. We know that he is not that.
And something else to keep in mind, that a lot of, especially anyone left of center, the lack of cooperation between the MAGA Republicans and the old school GOP is a real huge stumbling block for this side of the aisle. There are some things that are considered too liberal for a conservative to consider, and those things, I mean, I don't there's no way around it. There is no ideological consistency on this side of the aisle. Are we ever going to get another centrist as the president? Will that ever happen?
I really would like it if American conservatives would arrange better representation for themselves about 30 years ago, but I've really given up all hope of that ever happening. If you've had the same two parties for 160 years, you are doing something wrong, and your system cannot function effectively. When there are only two avenues to power, and it's actually nice to see that the British have begun to realize this, and we still haven't yet. Usually they lag behind us, but they are running in front of us on that point. Their conservatives have figured out that the Tory party, just we cannot place our hopes in the Tory party anymore. We need to move along to something else. And so all of the entire British right pretty much has abandoned the Tories and moved to Reform UK, as they should do. But their system, that's one of the advantages of a parliamentary system over the federal type of system that we have. It's
just cancel elections, just like nah.
Yes, they absolutely did. They canceled all of the local council elections that were supposed to happen this year. Delayed some of them until 2029, if I'm not mistaken, just because they knew that their side was going to lose. And how pro-democracy is that? Hooray, Sir Keir and the Stormtroopers.
Didn't Canada do the same thing?
I believe so, yes.
So what part of democracy is this?
I like democracy, except when I'm afraid I might lose.
Didn't the DNC do something very similar with Kamala Harris? Like, just appoint her?
There sure was not much of a democratic process there when they decided to shove a knife in Joe Biden's back and chuck him out the window, was there?
Is noticing a pattern some kind of ism?
It probably is.
No. What are we going to do?
Based on the people in tonight's chat, I'm sure we're going to be called all kinds of isms for pretty much everything we say at this point. I already got rid of that one fucking idiot.
Oh,
I might,
good.
I might do it again. Don't tempt me.
So while I am a First Amendment advocate, YouTube is not a First Amendment platform. Just so you know.
And I'm willing to tolerate idiocy up to a certain point, but I have a limit, and that guy passed it. So bye.
Just so you know, I once got blocked because I was talking about the moon landing conspiracy. Homeboy just blocked me for 24 hours, didn't say a fucking word about it. This is the first time it's been mentioned.
That reminds me. Did I ever tell you I got banned from the WWE subreddit just for saying I don't like women's wrestling?
Well, that makes sense. That's a subreddit, bro.
That is an absolutely true story. I didn't say anything bad about women, or I just said I don't think it should be 50% of the product. I don't enjoy watching women brutalize each other, and it's just not really for me. And I got
If
banned. And the explanation they gave was that we banned you for misogynist hate. That was considered misogynist hate. I know Reddit is wildly left wing in all respects, and I probably should have been expecting something like that, but it still surprised me a great deal.
dude,
that was regarded as misogynist hate.
of course it was. This is something I've noticed recently. I don't know how much of this is actually passing all the way through as actual cultural change. But for years online, there has been this phenomenon of cry bullying where everybody gets together, compares their victimhood points, and then the most victimized individual in the room proceeds to browbeat everyone else in the room about all of their privilege, and they let this shit happen.
Yes.
And in the past,
Victimization, or the perception of victimization, equals social currency, and it equals more social currency than you can get from anything else, even to the point where people who are very rich, famous, wealthy, and privileged will cosplay as being victims just so they can get some of that delicious social currency. And it's one of the most amazing phenomena in world history.
you're not wrong, but there's another layer to it that everyone's witnessed. No one has really bothered to identify as being the actionable problem. They cry bully. They utilize their victimhood points to beat you around the face and head and shut you up and make you look bad, even if you haven't actually done anything wrong.
And most
Because-
importantly, to avoid having a substantive discussion.
Yes, they shut off all actual debate and discourse in exchange for telling you what an immoral and horrible person you are. And
Yes.
largely, most of this is based on visual cues that they can utilize to other you.
Check your privilege, Whitey.
Okay, so in the past year, that shit hadn't been flying as well.
Oh, no.
Channels themselves have taken it upon themselves to widen their echo chambers a bit. And that's an excellent movement. I think that will win the culture war. If anything does, it will be the free discourse of ideas. And whatever platform ends up having that will be the winner of all of this.
Absolutely. And even just recently, I've noticed, as I'm sure you have too, people talking about subjects on YouTube that a few years ago would have been completely verboten and gotten the video and the channel ban-hammered in less than an instant. And that's an encouraging thing to see.
I want to point out the debate sphere that I have fallen backwards into over here could not have even existed in 2019.
Right.
And by 2020, had it existed, would have been nuked from orbit simply because they discuss current events.
And I guess I don't want to say that YouTube has changed in any meaningful way, because we know who owns YouTube. It's still Google. They might have a different CEO, but I mean, each time YouTube invites me to participate in some sort of user feedback survey, workshop, exercise, I always say yes, I want to participate, and then they ask me for my demographic details, and as soon as I'm a middle-aged white male who's not gay, they say, "Nah, sorry, you're not who we're looking for. Thanks anyway."
You're overrepresented, sir.
Yep. You are decidedly non-intersectional, and we don't require you any further.
And I don't I mean, I grew up in the era when all of this stuff was sort of being instigated. I once had a school award awarded to someone else because it had been 3 years since a black kid had won that award, and they were just like, "Can't you just let them use?" I'm like, "I don't give a fuck. I never cared about any of that." But it's something I remembered when when there was a tie once. Now keep in mind, I went to a largely black middle school, right? And we did these science experiments, and we had to do like the whole presentation and all of that stuff. And well, I'm fucking Sasquatch, dude. You know how my presentation went. It was goddamn awesome, right?
Yeah, it was.
Work of art. And the fucking people giving out the awards explained to me and the other 3 kids that were part of this, because all I really did was the presentation. They did all the actual work, and that was the way it was supposed to be anyway. Sat them down. First of all, we've been through this, but they're like, "Look, we have this underprivileged group of black kids over here that, and we both of you have gotten perfect marks, and you will have no difference in the results. You'll be listed right there with everyone else as the tie that it is, because it was 3 different schools, and there was a possibility of a 3-way tie. And our presentation on social dynamics in the late 19th century apparently was good enough, or at least the presentation was good enough, that it suckered its way in the back door, because we were just barely trying to get by. None of us actually put a whole lot of work into it. And this other school, I'm sure they worked very hard on their project. It was a very nice project, something about potatoes and dirt, and you probably guessed what it is by now. I think there was a light involved or something. I don't know. Voltmeters were definitely involved. But they basically just gave them the the spot in the newspaper, and then when it actually came out the other end, we were listed as with an asterisk, and no one could ever tell me what the fucking asterisk was about. What is that? Why does an asterisk exist unless it has a meaning? And no one could tell me what it meant. But we won. Yay.
And that sends the absolute worst possible message you could send to every kid that is concerned. To the kid that you've elevated over the other kids, you're saying meritocracy doesn't matter. If you're ever in a close contest with people who don't look like you, then you will be elevated based on your innate personal characteristics. And to the other kids who don't get elevated because they don't have the correct innate personal characteristics, then sorry, oh well, you're on the wrong side of diversity. So better get used to it, kids. Get used to having that dirt shoveled in your face.
That was kind of the strange thing about this whole setup, is that I was all right. So not everybody does the science fair or whatever it is you call it, right? It's determined by scoring, grading, and various other things. All of these kids are brilliant. They're all completely lazy. Nobody wants to do it, right? So we got together and decided, okay, we're going to do this particular thing. And it was actually Tracy's idea, 3 other black students and me. And Tracy's like, I've got an idea. It's stupid simple, and you're going to love it. And I'm like, what is it? She's like, we're going to do social dynamics, specifically of the Irish moving to America. There's this wonderful paper on it over here that explains absolutely everything. Here, read that. And I read it, and it was really cool. I was like, wow. And so when we did the presentation, she just got a bunch of pictures from Ellis Island, stuck them on a freaking board, and then a handful of like random photos. God, it was great. It was so good. Her dad worked at a place that had a for real photo thing. Yeah. And so we were able to go online and just download photos of it that were printed out with photo quality, and she set them up in some old looking photo albums and stuff. It was gorgeous, and none of us did a damn thing except read that one paper. And
you know what story I'm suddenly reminded of? And I don't actually know why I'm reminded of it, or why it's pertinent, but I'm going to tell it anyway. It's from about 15 years ago, when California schools were already kind of proto woke, let's say, but they certainly were not obviously in the next decade after that, and since then they've gone fully uber woke. But about 15 years ago, there was a high school valedictorian in Southern California. I don't think it was here in San Diego County, but it might have been in one of the surrounding counties. There was a high school valedictorian who, white kid, obviously, but he gave his valedictory speech in which he tried to give his classmates a harsh dose of reality, and he simply read out the demographic statistics about where they were all going to be in 10, 15, 20 years, whatever. And he said, such and such percentage of you are going to be dead, such and such percentage of you are going to be manual laborers, such and such percentage of you are going to be service workers, such and such of you will be homeless drug addicts, such and such of you, and then some tiny percentage of you will be wildly successful and affluent and wealthy. And the school district actually withheld his diploma and would not let him participate in any further school activities after that. Just they thought that was the most offensive thing they could ever see, they could ever imagine, that because you're supposed to blow smoke up everyone's ass. You're not supposed to give them reality. We don't like reality here. Don't give them reality. Who wants reality? That does not fit in with the proto woke message that we're trying to advance here, where everybody is perfect exactly as they are, and you can do anything if you just believe in yourself enough. And that's the kind of smoke that we're trying to sell here, and you are interfering with that message, you little bastard. So you don't even get your fucking diploma, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That is harsh. That is really harsh. Honesty is a plague to those who live within their own mind.
Oh yes, and it becomes ever easier to live in an intellectual bubble of your own choosing. Although intellectual is a probably a bit of an overstatement, because there's nothing intellectual about it. You can't really be intellectual while closing yourself off to ideas that you find inconvenient. But that's the way most people live now. Somehow the internet made us far more ignorant and far more insular, and I never thought that was going to happen, but it did.
It's amazing. And the addition of AI into the conversational matrix is just going to alienate each other more in the online spaces. Because what happens when I can no longer tell if you're you or you're an AI or some chubby dude in Boston? Like,
yeah, and it is another wondrously useful tool that has all kinds of really awesome potential that everybody is already using in exactly the wrong way. And that's just something we have to acclimate ourselves to, that every time a new technology or invention comes along, everybody uses it in completely the wrong way. It causes all manner of societal problems, and then everybody realizes it and decides, oh, maybe we should pull back on that. Maybe we should have noticed this problem 10 years ago. And I'm reminded of what Australia and a couple of European countries have banned social media for people under a certain age, under 18 or something now. And if you have to do something like that, then you notice the problem way the hell too late. So good job, assholes.
They've ostensibly, or no, that's not the right, ad hoc banned porn in Georgia because they have to, you have to identify yourself before you can log onto a porn site, and no porn site wants you to identify yourself, and so they don't even offer it. It's just, you can't use it there, because if you use it, you're violating a law, and that makes us culpable, and we're not even going to play that game.
I'm old enough to remember when, if you wanted porn, you had to go to a porn store. And that had a hell of a chilling effect on porn consumption. Isn't it amazing how that happens?
So consider this. I grew up in rental stores most of my childhood, through the entire death of rental video. And there are lots of clever ways to keep people from knowing what you're doing. But the second you do any of them, everybody knows what you're doing.
There it is.
So I don't know, man. It's a thing, and people do it, and they apparently don't do it in space, and that's why I don't believe in space travel.
And adult movie theaters used to be a thing too.
Right? But I think Pee Wee Herman whacked that job.
Yeah. Yeah, he was.
And I mean, I got feels for this man, because listen, he was the voice of the ship in Flight of the Navigator. And I love that freaking movie.
Oh, you're right. He was. I remember that.
Yes, he was. And he was in an adult location doing adult things with other adults. Why the fuck did anybody give him shit? Maybe he shouldn't have. Sure. Not sure what else.
What would the current day equivalent of that be? Like Miss Rachel getting busted for having an OnlyFans site?
Right. It'd be like finding out, let's see. It'd be like finding out the chubby chick from the big comfy couch has an OnlyFans, right?
Yeah, exactly. Where she diddles her bottom hole while she's wearing all the big comfy couch stuff.
Or even if she didn't, it wouldn't matter. I mean,
yeah.
People have been replaced for absolutely absurd things in various shows, like in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, and there is the social taboo around such things has been degraded almost to the point where it doesn't even exist anymore. It's like you find out a chick has an OnlyFans site, and it's like, yeah, so fucking everybody does.
I mean, hell, I've got two, but I'm not at liberty to discuss one of them because of the NDA I signed with the company, but we're not going to talk about that. Don't call me Bigfoot, okay?
I think you owe me a free membership.
I'll discuss it with the fucking yuppies up in New York, dude. I get no say on any of that. I will lodge a request, but I got nothing.
Squatch Vision XXX.
All right, you got me. And at this moment, I would like to grant you more Super Cats.
Yay, Super Cats.
I'm not doing that. Not the music. Nope. I like Super Cats. You like Super Cats?
Who doesn't? Look at that cat climbing up that stucco.
Right? Is it going to fit in the glass? Oh!
Damn.
Sir, I didn't order any pussy in this glass. Give me a Bloody Mary like I asked.
I swear to God, dude, I'm telling you right now, if I took a video of how obnoxiously affectionate my dog and one of my cats are with each other, I could probably pop more views on that video than I have popped in my entire career up to this point, including Hunter Biden's Cocaine Blues, including all of those 750,000 views, probably would blow right past it.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
I got a buddy of mine. He had a YouTube channel before I started my channel. And honestly, I mean, I'm that petty. I basically started my channel because he was like, yeah, I'd love to have some help with the channel. I'm like, we should try this and that and this and that and this and that. And he went, that's just so much work, man. And I was like, okay, fine. So I started my own channel. Next thing you know, I got 1,000 subscribers and a bunch of motherfuckers giggling at me for no apparent reason. And he's looking over at me with his like 172 subscribers going, all right, fine. What should I do? I was like, do you have any cats? He's like, my neighbor has cats. I said, go film the fucking cats, dude. Put up kitten videos. You'll make a bajillion goddamn people happy. And he took that idea, but he twisted it a little bit, and he did a voiceover on some of them. And the problem is the man sounds like a rusty creaking gate. He sounds like he kind of sounds like a Sling Blade.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Should we, in the few minutes we have remaining, should we talk about the Anacothera mechanism a little bit?
Absolutely. Is that the right thing or the wrong thing? We're just showing more cats. You got the.
I keep clicking add to stage, but it's not adding it to the. There it is.
Yeah, I have to remove this before you can add that. It's something.
All right, I've got it dialed to the mechanic. Operate on the front face of the mechanism. There is a fixed ring dial representing the ecliptic. The 12 zodiac signs marked off with equal 30-degree sectors. This matched with the Babylonian custom of assigning 1/12 of the ecliptic to each zodiac sign equally, even though the constellation boundaries were variable. Outside that dial is another ring which is rotatable, marked off with the months and days of the Sothic Egyptian calendar, 12 months of 30 days plus 5 intercalary days. The months are marked with the Egyptian names for the months transcribed into the Greek alphabet. The first task is to rotate the Egyptian calendar ring to match the current zodiac points. The Egyptian calendar ignored leap days, so it advanced through a full zodiac sign in about 120 years. And isn't it fascinating that a device that is so anachronistically technologically advanced should be dealing in zodiac signs? But it doesn't it seem kind of like they were trying to transliterate Greek things in some way? I mean, that's the impression I get.
Or, and hear me out here, the Greek measurement of such things were slightly different from the Egyptian measurement and such things, and so they showed both of them to get the most accurate predictions.
Right, because we are very quick to forget today that not everybody had the same calendar back, over a millennium ago. In fact, every society had a different calendar, and that obviously has to introduce huge complications into things like sea voyages, which I imagine is a lot of the purpose for which this mechanism was first built, even though we are obviously just grasping at straws because we still don't have a good answer for that. The mechanism was operated by turning a small hand crank, now lost, which was linked via a crown gear to the largest gear, the four-spoked gear visible on the front of fragment A, gear B1. This moved the date pointer on the front dial, which would be set to the correct Egyptian calendar day. The year is not selectable, so it is necessary to know the year currently set or by looking up the cycles indicated by the various calendar cycle indicators on the back of the Babylonian ephemeris tables for the day of the year currently set, since most of the calendar cycles are not synchronous with the year. The crank moves the date pointer about 78 days per full rotation, so hitting a particular day on the dial would easily be possible if the mechanism were in good working condition. The action of turning the hand crank would also cause all interlocked gears within the mechanism to rotate, resulting in the simultaneous calculation of the position of the sun and moon, the moon phase, eclipse, and calendar cycles, and perhaps the locations of planets. So that's obviously has to do with celestial navigation at sea. There's nothing else it could be related to, really. Am I wrong?
The idea that you could pick out a day or part of a day on that mechanism is wild.
I know. It's a 1,500-year-old computer.
Yeah,
to all intents and purposes. It's
not that much different from a pocket watch, except it's a pocket watch made of pieces you can actually hold.
Yeah, and how amazing would it be if we found one that was more intact than the one that we've already found? That would be fantastic. And,
okay, so
we
let me run an idea about you. And I'm not the one that captained this one. It was somebody else. I've read it somewhere, full disclosure. But would it be possible for something to manually turn that wheel with enough regularity as to act as a clock? Could it have been attached to something like a water clock or something along those lines?
Yeah, or even if you have a reliable hourglass, then each time the hourglass runs out, you turn the crank, one click or however many clicks, and it seems like there could be something like that involved. And then based on the positioning of the dials and the corresponding position of the moon and the planets and certain stars, then that gives you a reasonable idea of where you are on your sea voyage.
Right.
My thinking always leads me back to, it was found on a shipwreck, obviously, so it has something to do with nautical celestial navigation. I don't think we're too remiss in making that assumption.
Access to that type of timekeeping would literally open up the world to the culture that could do it.
Yeah, and if we found one that was intact, it would and we were able to gain a clear and unambiguous understanding of how it worked and what it was for, it would really possibly completely transform our understanding of the ancient world at large, and that would be incredibly exciting in my judgment.
The British literally took over the entire world with exactly that calculation. Now,
yes,
it's time for you to do a thing.
I'll do the thing. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius tonight. We had a great time. We hope you did too, except for that one asshole I had to get rid of, but fuck him anyway. We will see you next week because you won't be watching the Super Bowl. You will be watching the Blast Radius because you don't like watching sports leagues that hate you and hate everything you believe in. You like watching shows that like you and like the things you believe in and tell you intellectually edifying things. We hope you have a great day tomorrow and a great day afterward and a very pleasant, satisfying remainder of your week. See you next Sunday, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. As always, good night. See you later. Get off my lawn.